looking back, it would have been probably smarter to have used two devices, but I have absolute confidence that everything that could be in any way connected to work is now in the possession of the State Department.
Our guest is senior political analyst for the Washington Examiner and resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Welcome, Michael Barone, back to MidPoint. Mike, it's a pleasure to see you again.
Hey, good to be with you.
Let's get into this about Hillary Clinton here, because all of a sudden it breaks, thanks to the New York Times, that Darrell Issa, the Republican chairman of the House Committee on Oversight, Government Reform at the time, basically had asked Mrs. Clinton about, and the exact question, have you or any senior agency official ever used a personal email account to conduct official business? If so, please identify the account used. That was back in 2012, and she completely ignored the request. How big a deal is this?
Well, I think it's just another example of how Hillary Clinton regards herself as above the law and above the constraints that the law imposes on everybody else. I don't think there's any legitimate excuse for her ignoring this, and it's perfectly obvious, despite her claim that she wanted the convenience of carrying around one device. We know that she's in fact been carrying around multiple devices, that her purpose was concealment. She was trying to conceal information from those who had a right to see it. So just as she's calling for a campaign finance regulation and a stamp down on big contributions at the same time when her backers are boasting they're going to raise $2.5 billion for her campaign, this is another example of how she feels she's above the law.
Michael, I was always taught to be a man of very few words when the time comes, and also to use simple words. We use words, and you're correct, like concealment, which is what many people are using. Many people in America, though, will look at that and say, that's a lie. So what many people still want to wonder is how Mrs. Clinton gets away with lying so often on so many issues, and she doesn't seem to get called on it to where it really has any impact. It's like it doesn't stick.
Well, I think it does stick to some considerable extent. If you look at the recent Quinnipiac polls in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Florida, you'll note that well under 50% of the respondents say that she's honest and trustworthy, something on the order of 41% or thereabouts. That's a devastating number for somebody going into a political campaign. And we've also, how does she avoid scrutiny? Well, she says that she's transparent and wants to meet ordinary people, and she avoids all questions from the press. I don't think she's going to be able to avoid all questions from the press indefinitely. Other candidates get peppered with questions. They respond to them in varying ways with varying effectiveness. Hillary Clinton at some point is going to have to face that, or her reputation for honesty, trustworthiness, and probity will decline further.
When you talk about talking to the press, she hasn't done that since she announced that she was going to run for president. All social media, now basically the mystery machine tour, if you will, to Iowa. In your opinion, though, is this not a smart move by the Clinton campaign? Keep her away from the press. You've got a long way to go until you get to that Democratic National Convention. So why let everybody push you to the wall right now?
Well, that may be the calculation that she's making. I think it's a short-term calculation. There are 571 days, I believe, from today until the presidential election. Will she be able to avoid press questioning for all 571 days? I rather doubt it. As Secretary of State, she made a practice of declining to go on the Sunday shows. I think at some point she's going to have to submit to questioning. And even a press most members of whom are inclined to support her candidacy would like to see her rather than a Republican as president, I think at some point are going to stop acting like geldings and start asking some questions.
Is that pretty much part of the problem we have here, Michael, is that many people, even when it comes to the press, are geldings around her and let her get away with it?
Well, I think that's part of the political situation. I mean, the Constitution, as I like to tell my conservative friends, the Constitution guarantees us a free press, not a fair one. We don't have a free press. We have a press whose personnel, by and large, 80% or so, are on one side of a political divide that tends to split the country down the middle. And their responses and their behavior tends to reflect
that. If you would, please stand by just one moment, Michael, because we have to take a break. We're right up against it. We'll come back. We'll talk more about Iran and the nuclear deal here on MidPoint. On the surface, it would seem that despite what Congress has done with regard to the Iranian nuclear deal, that regime is playing America like a 72-string santur. It's a traditional Iranian instrument. Let's find out if they are. Our guest, once again, senior political analyst for the Washington Examiner, resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Welcome, Michael Barone, back to MidPoint. Michael, let's deal with this right now, because with all of the issues now going around, and now the Congress is going to have their say, the president acquiesces, he yields, says, okay, I'll do what you want. Look, are we knee-jerking on all of this with regard to the Iran nukes and the fact that they are so dangerous, or maybe the president knows something we don't? There's got to be some truth in here somewhere.
Well, I think the the behavior of the Iranian regime for the last 35 years and going into the last week and several days is one of extreme hostility to America, death to America. They've been a major source of terrorism against the United States, its allies, and its friends around the world. And President Obama seems to think that somehow reaching what he claims is a nuclear agreement is going to change the character of the regime. Well, the optimist in me hopes that that could be done. The realist in me says that seems quite unlikely, absent some sort of revolutionary, significant regime change of the sort that last happened there in 1979. So, the fact that we have a nuclear agreement, which isn't an agreement, in which the Iranian government and the supreme leader have described the terms in ways that are inconsistent with the way that the Obama administration and the U.S. government are describing those terms, says to me that we've got real problems here when you've got people like the IAEA veteran inspector Olli Heinonen, I hope I'm pronouncing his Finnish name correctly, says that we simply can't have an effective inspection regime under the terms even as presented by the U.S. government. I think that's cause for serious concern.
Then in your opinion, and you've covered Washington for a long time, you know what people are thinking there. Is this president just flatly naive, or is he just flatly reckless?
Well, history will have an answer for us in 20 or 30 years on that. I would say the odds are favoring that he's being reckless, and I think it's interesting that there's clearly majorities in both houses of Congress, including many members of the Democratic as well as almost all the members of the Republican Party, who are basically opposed to the agreement, even as set forth in the terms by the U.S. government, much less the terms set out by the Iranian government. President Obama is using the powers of the presidency, which are particularly broad in foreign and military policy, to try and put through a policy that a majority of the American people and a majority of their representatives in Congress, a large majority, tend to oppose. He's doing that on the supposition that, or the hope, that this will change the behavior of a regime which has been unremittingly hostile to the United States. I hope that works out. I think that we've got to see a change in the Mullah regime altogether before something in the nature of a change of regime comparable to that of 1979, before we can be anything like sure that they're headed in a positive direction.
Michael, I got about 90 seconds left. In the New York Times, they were saying that the essence of the legislation is Congress will have a chance to vote on whatever deal is reached, but it would be difficult for Mr. Obama to lose, allowing John Kerry to tell the Iranians that the risk that an agreement would be upended on Capitol Hill is limited. Would you agree with that assertion?
Yes, I agree with that. I mean, Senator Bob Corker, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, made concessions to Democrats, including their skillful negotiator, Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland, on this. A treaty requires a 2/3 vote in the Senate. What they've got now is a formulation by which U.S. sanctions could be withdrawn, sanctions voted by Congress, if President Obama can prevent a 2/3 vote of a veto override. So that shifts the balance of congressional power in a way that is negative to those who hope to prevent this agreement, as the terms have been announced, from going into effect.
About 30 seconds or so, the way that he lost this in Congress against him, do you think this will anger Barack Obama at this point, and he'll come back and fire out on something else even greater and even more forceful?
Well, I think it may anger the president. Obviously, he didn't want to acquiesce to this, but when you had a more than 2/3, and it turned out a unanimous vote in the Foreign Relations Committee, obviously he didn't have much choice. That was a vote of no confidence in the president's policies. I think it's unfortunate that the president doesn't take this as a way to play good cop and bad cop with Iran and say to Iran, well, I really want to reach agreement with you, but I've got to insist on some tougher things because the Congress insists on it.
And here you're talking about compromise. Michael, we have to stop making common sense here when we talk about politics sometimes, because people are going to think that we're too smart. Michael Barone, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. I appreciate your time. We'll look forward to the next time.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right, thank you, Mike. 2 years ago today, the country banded together and stood Boston strong. We'll talk about that when we continue.